time for chapter 13, the Renaissance. Okay, so remember when we started talking about the Romans and the Greeks, and then we moved into the medieval period and all of the great philosophy, the science, math, physics got started back then. All of these teachings literally got tucked and stored away. Thank goodness the church didn't get rid of all of them. They were stored out of sight as we saw Europe break up into different pieces. So all of that knowledge kind of got hidden for a while. So now you've got these great thinkers in the Renaissance who discover these old teachings. It comes to the surface and they're like, there are so many answers here, so much knowledge. And so they took it and it was a revitalization really of society, of building upon these ancient ideas. Also introduced here is neoclassicism, which is about perfectionism, really more about the French. We'll get into that later. We'll start with Italy. Where the Renaissance began really was Italy and their commedia dell'arte. So slapstick comedy, guys. I mean, it's here. Different kind of comedy, next level. So you've got, literally they would have things like a wooden sword with a spring and a little piece of wood, and it would snap and make the sound, and literally you have a slapstick. There's a great reference here to the Three Stooges and the whole eye-poking bit and that physical, silly comedy. You had sort of a court jester kind of a situation going on. People just wanted to laugh, to be taken out of themselves. The actors would usually travel around in troops. You might have heard of, I'm sure you've heard of SNL, Saturday Night Live. They have a big feeder company called Second City in Chicago. And I hope you've heard of Tina Fey. She's a big actress and sitcom writer, producer, director. So she wrote a book called Bossy Pants, and she talks about her time where she actually was in a traveling group, and it's very reminiscent of this time period where you would have a troupe of 10 to 12 actors, and they would have a repertoire of 20 to 30 different scene ideas, and they would travel and they would take note of whatever city they were in, monuments or political figures or restaurants everybody knew about, or just things that were very unique to that area, and they would work it into their skit. So they would have a basic idea, but they were expected to use improv, and you saw a lot of improvisational acting. And so you'd have 10 to 12 people, but each of those 10 to 12 people could play 30 characters, and they would have all these different skits ready to go, and they would make it new and fresh. Very, very interesting. Here's a little breakdown of the different kind of actors for you there. So just genius stuff that we're still using. Okay, dramatic rules of neoclassicism, ideals. Okay, so neoclassicism, perfection. We are taking this knowledge, but we are building upon it. We're making it perfect, if you will. So things you had to remember, some things that we call unities. Action. All right, one story, one complete story. We're not jumping around in different storylines. Keep it clean, keep it simple. Okay, time. This had to be in real time. Okay, if you had 12 to 24 hours was pushing it. A time jump of an hour or more had to be explained. It was confusing for them. They wanted to see it happen in real time. Certainly no flashbacks or time jumps or the craziness that we just accept. And we're like, oh, okay, so we've gone back in time, or we started in the future and now we're back to here. No, couldn't do any of that. And your place, singular location, okay? And also where we have, say, J.R. Tolkien's world of the Lord of the Rings. We can get there because we have the technical advances now to create that world, or, film in New Zealand. But that had to be one type of place. You also couldn't start a story in, say, London and end in Beijing. I mean, the characters had to move. It had to be physically seen how they were doing something, or they'd have to be able to comprehend it. So typically you had one location. So just some things that were considered, this is how you do it. Okay, and then getting along to the pursuit of perfection. So we've got, it needs to be real. It needs to be truthful. We can't just, there is some silliness, but that's not neoclassicism, is it? Decorum, it's got to be appropriate. It's got to be decent. Because remember, the people that are paying for this are the wealthy, and they have to at least look like they care about decorum. Continuity from one scene to another. So if you have a couple of actors in one scene, you'd usually have one actor who would go into the next scene. The others might exit, but you'd keep somebody on stage to kind of keep the continuation going. You wouldn't just have everybody leave and another set come in. That was not the style of the time. Okay, some good probing questions here. Moving on, now Italy enters the picture, okay? So this is really more like, that was the 1500s, really. Like that's when you saw that movement kind of start. Now we're looking at like around the middle of the 1400s. Look at some of these theaters. You've seen these pictures before. Something really stands out here, and that is there's a set that's always there. It doesn't change, it's the same thing. Now the story, you may come back to this theater several times, see different stories, but the costumes might change. You probably will, maybe some props, but your setting's the same, and people were getting over that. It's kind of a dated idea, right? Haha. Enter the Teatro Olimpico. This is fascinating. Actually burned, well, most of it was destroyed in World War II for the bomb. So this is a recreation, these pictures right here. But it is there. You can take tours of it today. But I love this because it's the first time we really see a proscenium. And remember, that's that frame that goes around the stage on that fourth wall. It's the nice frame around everything. We see a proscenium, and you look into the depths of this back here, and the possibilities are endless. Almost like that looks almost endless, but the possibilities are endless about how you can dress that as a set. But then you look over here at the audience, and you're seeing very, very similar to what we saw with the Greeks. All right, so that introduction. Oh, and it also should be stated that a way to show off about being Italian or French or English was your advances in technology. What's a way that you can show off your advances in technology? Well, when you're entertaining people from other countries and you're showing them theater, you're going to have huge cranes that are pulling choirs in and out. You're going to have big sets coming and rolling on and off stage. The more tech, even here, tech became a sign of how advanced you were and a way of showing how powerful you were. So that was, shown even in theatrical performances. Okay, England, it's your turn. Coming in a little bit later in the game, you had the 100-Year War going on. You had the War of the Roses. You had Henry VIII, just wow, Henry VIII and his 6 wives. But he does manage to produce Elizabeth I. And she is a good, consistent ruler, dedicates her entire life, literally marries England. And in her time in rule, theater was back. And you would have it with not just the elite, but the common person as well. Now, there are theaters, of course, as we talked about the Globe Theater and the Round. Your poorer people would be in the orchestra type layer, standing up. Your more aristocratic or wealthy would be have seats to sit in. But it was available for everybody. Mostly all built with wood. Look at this horrible list right here of all these theaters that burn. It's just sad. I mean, it makes you understand why in that first couple of chapters we talked about the fire curtain, and it is absolutely unquestionable. You cannot have a theater without a theater fire curtain because of the risk of fire, even today. Important notes there. Private theaters were a thing too. Now, I don't know if you've ever had the chance to go to a madrigal, also known as a Yule log or a Boarheads festival. This was a huge pageantry done around a feast. You'd have a host, you would have the meal pieces would come in, you would have madrigals singing and dancing and playing music. It was a great theatrical performance along with meal. Really, dinner theater is what it was. And to go along with that, sometimes you would have a disguising, which I think is really fun. One of the more popular ones in England was Beauty and the Beast. Now, that's a French show, of course, but when the beast would transform at the end, they would sometimes bring back in the host. So they'd have somebody playing the beast, transform, in comes your host, and voila, kind of fun. Just ways that we would being able to entertain your guests is something only the very wealthy could do. All right, Spain. They're having the Spanish Inquisition where they are having so much money from the Catholic Church and the New World. They're seeing amazing wealth. What I dig about Spain here is that their theater wasn't just religious, it was also secular. They had both going on and they supported them both. You also saw something that we still love now, which is secrecy. Intrigue, espionage. I mean, that's why we watch shows about that, right? We have so many things. You look at something, it's intriguing and you want to watch it. Not just as simple as tragedy or comedy, but intriguing, right? Suspenseful. That's the cloak and dagger. We can thank the Spanish for that. They came up with that idea of the cape and sword. So, All right. Okay, I wanted to give you a picture. They didn't have it provide you any real pictures here of the Corrales, so I kind of pulled one up here ahead of time. There it is. Look at how beautiful that is. That's in Spain. That's what you'd look at maybe for a theater there. And you see something similar. You got down here for probably those who are paying less money in order to get in, and then you got where your aristocrats would sit up here with a little bit better seats. Obviously, this is a modern adaptation, but that is what it would sort of look like. Very similar to what you would see in England. All right. Here's some good playwrights to take note of. Oh no, now French. The French are finally in, but not until the 17th century. They are late to this game. But when you think about neoclassicism, perfectionism, doesn't that just kind of feel French? Oh yeah, and they embraced it completely, the idea of this perfection. But Pierre Corneille, he actually challenged the rules of neoclassicism with his play Le Cid. And he did write other things afterwards, but he got such a social beating about that one by not following those rules that we talked about before, that he really wasn't appreciated as much in his time. But even Voltaire used him later in his writings. You've got Jean Racine, who did it perfectly. I mean, just did the ideas of the rules of neoclassicism and the Renaissance perfectly, and his plays are seen as just the model for that time period. Now Moliere, he was known for his comedies. So Tartuffe, was probably one of his biggest ones. The Misanthrope. These are works that if you get into literature in college, you're gonna probably be introduced to them. Gotta have some Moliere in your life for sure. But at least he's funny if you know how to read it. Okay. And there were several houses here, but I'll tell you what, I've looked around, there's just not that many great pictures of what the theaters looked like in France. I mean, you can kind of see the outside buildings, they were built into palaces sometimes. As part as this is the palace, we've got to entertain dignitaries, they built the theaters in there, but there's just not a whole lot of pictures out there to pull from. So yeah, so that kind of walks you through, don't forget your little assignments here, walks you through England, Spain, Italy, and the French. So don't forget about your quiz here. And yeah, that is the Renaissance in a nutshell.